The email arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded from my brother's account by accident, and I almost deleted it without reading it. That's the part I keep coming back to, how close I came to never knowing. I was 31, living in Austin, working in healthcare administration at a mid-sized hospital system. I had built a life that looked, from the outside, like someone who had figured things out. A one-bedroom apartment near South Congress, a job I was genuinely good at, a small circle of friends who showed up when it mattered. What I hadn't figured out, what I had spent most of my adult life carefully not examining, was my family. My brother Elliot was 4 years older than me and had always operated like he was the only person in any room who understood how things actually worked. He was the kind of man who explained things you hadn't asked about and held eye contact a beat too long, as if daring you to disagree. Our father, Henry, had been quietly proud of him in the way that men of that generation often were, loudly, through omission. Henry praised Elliot at dinners. He mentioned Elliot's promotions at church. He kept a framed photo of Elliot's law school graduation on the shelf in his study. There was no photo of my college graduation on that shelf. I checked, more than once, in the way you do when you're trying to confirm something you already know, but haven't yet let yourself say out loud. I don't want to make this sound like a wound I carried visibly. I didn't. I was good at the particular kind of compartmentalization that middle children in uneven families learn early, the skill of observing the unfairness without naming it, of needing less so that the math worked out. I left for UT Austin at 18 and came back for holidays with the emotional armor you pack without realizing it, the automatic lightness that is in happiness so much as self-protection. My father had a heart attack 18 months before everything fell apart. He survived it, but just barely, and it changed him in ways that were hard to watch. He got quieter. He started calling me on random Sundays just to ask how work was going, and he would listen in a way he hadn't when I was younger, with real attention, following up 2 calls later on things I'd mentioned in passing. I didn't know what to do with the shift. It felt like being handed something after spending years being told there was nothing to give. He passed away 14 months after the heart attack on a Thursday morning in February, with my mother and Elliot at the hospital. I was on a flight when it happened. I landed and turned my phone off airplane mode and had 17 missed calls. The weeks after were administrative in the way that grief sometimes is. There were arrangements and a service and casseroles that appeared at my mother's house in Lubbock, and cousins I hadn't seen in years who said things like, "He's at peace now," with the confident authority of people who had never questioned what that meant. Elliot handled most of the logistics. He was efficient about it in a way that read as competence but felt, if you were watching carefully, slightly too eager. I noticed it but didn't say anything. You don't, in those weeks. There's a social contract around grief that makes it hard to name anything uncomfortable without looking like the problem. The email came 6 weeks after the funeral. Elliot had been forwarding things from my father's estate account, insurance documents, a letter from the county assessor's office, a notice about the Lubbock property taxes. I assumed this was another one of those. I opened it on my lunch break, at my desk, eating a sandwich I barely tasted. It was from a paralegal at Whitmore and Associates, the law firm that had handled my parents' estate planning for years. The subject line was R.E. Amendment H. Callaway Trust, Final Distribution. The email was addressed to Elliot. He had forwarded it to me by mistake. I know this because it contained, embedded in the thread below his message, an exchange between him and the paralegal that went back 11 weeks, starting 3 weeks before my father died. I read it twice before I fully understood what I was looking at. My father had amended his trust in the last year of his life. The original trust had split his estate evenly between Elliot and me. The amendment, which had been filed and notarized, directed 70% of his liquid assets and the Lubbock property to me. Elliot had found out about the amendment, and for the past 11 weeks, he had been corresponding with the paralegal, a woman named Lisa, who I had spoken to exactly once at the firm's front desk, about whether there was a way to, as he put it in one message, revisit the documents before the reading. Lissa had written back, in the careful language of someone who knew she was on thin ice, that she would look into what options might exist given the timeline. There was one more email in the chain, the most recent one. It was from Elliot to Lisa, sent 8 days before the forwarding accident. It said, "I need you to check whether the amendment can be successfully challenged if my sister is distracted by a personal matter during the probate window. I have something that may be useful on that front." I put down my sandwich. I sat with that sentence for a long time. A personal matter, something that may be useful. I didn't call Elliot. I didn't call my mother. I drove home after work, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table thinking about the specific way Elliot had looked at me at the funeral reception. Not grief exactly, but something more calculating, like he was measuring something. I had learned early not to misread Elliot's angles as paranoia. He was always playing a longer game than the one in front of him. The question was what he thought he had on me, and how he intended to use it. I found out 4 days later. He called on a Saturday morning, which was unusual. Elliot communicated mostly by text, short, directive messages that assumed compliance. A phone call meant something was being staged. He asked how I was holding up, he asked about work, he asked about my apartment. And then, in a pivot so smooth it was almost impressive, he said that he had been going through Dad's things and had found something he thought I should know about. Something that had apparently been kept from me for a long time. His voice was careful, rehearsed but carefully so. He told me that he had found a letter in my father's desk, in a folder labeled with my name. He told me the letter suggested that my father had known, since before I was born, that he was not my biological father. He told me that the letter mentioned a man whose last name was Vasquez, someone my mother had known before she married Henry Calloway, and that according to the letter, my mother had told Henry the truth when I was still an infant. He delivered this the way people deliver things they've been holding on to, with performed reluctance and real satisfaction underneath it. "I thought you deserved to know," he said, "before any of the estate stuff gets complicated." I was quiet for a moment. "Send me a copy of the letter," I said. He hesitated. "I think this is more of a conversation in person." "Send it to me," I said again. "Today." He didn't send it that day. He sent it 3 days later, a photograph of a handwritten letter on my father's stationery. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting looked like my father's. The phrasing didn't. My father was an economical writer. He made lists. He used short sentences. He did not write things like, "The weight of this knowledge has long rested heavily upon my conscience," which was, verbatim, the third sentence of the letter Elliot had photographed. I forwarded the image to 3 people: my mother, a handwriting analyst I found through a forensic consulting firm in Dallas, and an estate attorney named Pauline, who a colleague at the hospital had used during her own parents' estate process and described as very quiet and very unmovable. My mother called within 20 minutes. She was crying before she finished her first sentence, but not in the way someone cries when a secret has finally surfaced. She was crying in the way someone cries when they're frightened. "That letter is not from your father," she said. "I don't know where Elliot got that stationery, but I have never, your father, never." She stopped. "You are Henry Calloway's daughter, biologically and every other way. I need you to know that." I believed her. Not because I needed to, but because I knew my mother's voice when she was telling the truth, and this was it. I asked her if she had ever heard the name Vasquez in connection with herself or my father. She was quiet for a moment that felt like the wrong kind of quiet. And then she said no, not defensively, but in the careful way of someone making sure they were accurate. I told her I would handle it. Pauline reviewed everything in a single 2-hour meeting. She was a small woman in her 50s with very short gray hair and the specific manner of someone who had spent decades watching people behave badly around money and had stopped being surprised by any of it. She looked at the email chain, the letter photograph, and a timeline I had constructed of Elliot's communications with the paralegal. She read everything without expression. "The paralegal is a problem," she said, "for the firm and for your brother." She explained that Lisa's correspondence constituted potential misconduct, a fiduciary working with the beneficiary to explore options before a trust reading without disclosure to the other beneficiaries. She said she would be contacting the firm's managing partner directly. "What about the letter?" I asked. "The handwriting analysis will tell us what we need. But the letter is also, frankly, somewhat beside the point. Even if the claims in it were true, they would have no bearing on your inheritance rights under a validly executed trust amendment." She paused. "Your brother appears to have misunderstood the law he was trying to use." The handwriting analysis came back 11 days later. The analyst's report concluded that the letter contained significant inconsistencies with authenticated samples of my father's handwriting, including differences in letter formation, pen pressure, and baseline alignment that were inconsistent with natural variation and consistent with deliberate imitation. Elliot had forged the letter, not well, as it turned out, but well enough to frighten someone who didn't have resources or who wasn't paying attention. I had been paying attention since I was 8 years old. Pauline reached out to Whitmore and Associates on a Wednesday. The managing partner, a man named Gordon, called me himself by Thursday afternoon. His tone was the specific, formal register of someone managing significant legal exposure. He confirmed that Lisa had been placed on administrative leave. He confirmed that the firm would be cooperating fully with any proceedings related to the trust administration. The trust reading happened on a Monday in April. Elliot arrived with an attorney, a man whose name I recognized from billboards near the highway, someone who handled aggressive civil litigation and apparently didn't ask too many questions before taking a retainer. Elliot was dressed carefully, which I noticed. He dressed carefully when he felt uncertain. My mother sat at the far end of the conference table and looked at her hands for most of the reading. Gordon read the trust without editorial. My father had left 68% of his liquid assets, the Lubbock property, and his investment accounts to me. The remainder went to my mother, with Elliot receiving a specific bequest of personal property and my father's truck, which Elliot had borrowed and never returned for the last 4 years of my father's life. The silence after Gordon finished reading had a particular texture, dense, pressurized. Elliot's attorney started to speak. Pauline placed a document on the table. It was a copy of the email chain. It was a copy of Lisa's correspondence. It was a copy of the forensic handwriting analysis. And it was a copy of a letter from Gordon, on firm letterhead, confirming that Lisa had been engaged in unauthorized communications with Elliot regarding the trust prior to the reading. Pauline explained, in the same register she used for everything, that the trust contained a no-contest clause. Any challenge to the document's validity that was found to be brought in bad faith would result in Elliot forfeiting his specific bequests to the estate entirely and assuming personal liability for legal costs and any demonstrated financial interference with estate assets, which, as Pauline then noted, included a $22,000 transfer from a joint account my father had held with my mother, moved to an account under Elliot's name in the final 3 months of my father's hospitalization. Elliot's attorney went very still. Elliot said, "That account was for household expenses." His attorney put a hand on his arm. Elliot stopped talking. The no contest clause held. The forensic letter analysis had already been submitted to the county probate court as supporting documentation for the trust's validity. Elliot's attorney withdrew from the case within 2 weeks. The challenge was never formally filed. The $22,000 was reclassified as a debt owed to the estate. Elliot had 6 months to repay it. My mother came to see me in Austin the following month. She drove herself, which surprised me. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had first read that email, eaten the same lunch, not understood yet what I was looking at, and she told me things she had never said. She told me that she had known, for years, that Elliot had been managing my father's perception of me, small things, mentioned in the right rooms, framed the right way. She said she had told herself it was sibling rivalry, normal friction, nothing that required her to intervene. She said she had been wrong about that. She didn't say she was sorry in those words exactly. She said, I should have said something sooner, which is the closest some people get. I told her I understood. I also told her that I needed time, not anger. I wasn't angry at her, not exactly, but I needed to stop being the person who absorbed things quietly to keep the math working. That was a habit I was done with. I managed the estate remotely. The Lubbock property sold in July. I didn't move back. I kept the one thing from my father's desk that was genuinely his, a small leather notebook where he had written, in his actual handwriting, short notes to himself. Reminders. Observations. Near the back, on a page dated about 2 years before he died, he had written my name and then below it, a single line, steady, knows what she's doing, doesn't need me to tell her. I read it more times than I'll admit, not because it fixed anything, but because it confirmed something I had always half suspected and never let myself fully believe, that he had seen me clearly, even when he hadn't always shown it. Elliot repaid the $22,000 in 2 installments. We have not spoken since the trust reading. I don't know if we will. Some relationships survive the moment when someone shows you exactly who they are under pressure. Some don't. I'm no longer deciding which kind this is, I'm just living with what it turned out to be. I found a therapist in Austin, a woman who specializes in family systems, which is a clinical way of saying she understands how families teach you to disappear inside them. I've been going every other week. I talk about my father more than I expected to, about the notebook, about the Sunday phone calls in his last year, about how it's possible to grieve someone and be angry at them and also be grateful, all at once for the same person. There's a particular kind of inheritance that doesn't show up in a trust document. It's not money and it's not property. It's the version of yourself that someone else saw before you did, held on to it, and eventually found a way to hand it back. My father did that, imperfectly, too late in some ways, but he did it. That's the part I'm still learning how to carry. I keep thinking about the email, the one that wasn't meant for me, the one I almost deleted. There's something uncomfortable about the fact that the whole thing hinged on a forwarding mistake, that Elliot's entire plan unraveled, not because I was clever enough to catch him, but because he was careless enough to slip. I've had to sit with that. The outcome I got wasn't purely earned through vigilance, some of it was just Tuesday afternoon luck. But here's what I've come to understand. The luck only mattered because I was ready for it. When that email landed in my inbox, I didn't panic. I didn't call him and tip my hand. I read it twice, put it down, and thought clearly about what it meant and what to do next. That's not instinct. That's something you build, slowly, over years of paying attention when everyone around you assumed you weren't. Elliot assumed I wouldn't notice. He had always assumed that. It was, looking back, his most consistent mistake about me. There's a version of the story where I fall apart the moment he calls to tell me about the forged letter, where I spend weeks trying to figure out if there's any truth to what he's saying about my father, too destabilized to look at the actual documents carefully. That's what he was counting on, that he could throw me off balance long enough for the probate window to close in his favor. He wasn't just trying to take money. He was trying to use my own uncertainty about my place in that family as a weapon against me. What stopped it wasn't anger, and it wasn't luck alone. It was the habit of staying steady when things felt wrong, the habit of verifying instead of assuming, the habit of trusting what I knew over what someone was performing for me. My father left a note in a small leather notebook, not a legal document, not a letter meant for anyone, just a private line he wrote to himself about me 2 years before he died. Steady, knows what she's doing, doesn't need me to tell her. He saw something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself yet, and Elliot, who had watched the same person his whole life, saw nothing but someone easy to outmaneuver. The difference between those two readings of who I was, that's the whole story. What I've taken from all of it is this. The people who try to manipulate others almost always reveal, in the attempt, exactly how little they respect the person they're targeting. Elliot didn't forge that letter because he thought I was formidable. He forged it because he was certain I wasn't. That certainty was his real failure, not the careless email. Not the bad handwriting analysis, not the no contest clause. He had underestimated me so completely and for so long that it had stopped occurring to him to wonder whether he should be more careful. I don't feel triumphant about how it ended. My father is still gone. My mother still has to live with the version of herself that stayed quiet for too long. Elliot and I don't speak, and I'm not sure that's a loss I'll ever fully know how to name. But I know that I didn't disappear into what he tried to make of me. I stayed clear. I asked the right questions. I found the right people. I held my ground without performing anything. That's the inheritance I'm most grateful for, not the property, not the accounts. The knowledge that when it counted, I showed up as exactly the person my father had quietly believed I was. That's the part I'm still learning how to carry.